Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Making Media podcast. This is episode 2, and today we'll be talking about music and taking a look at the music industry. Now, I'm a musician. I can play a couple different instruments, but I haven't really performed or recorded anything aside from playing alone at home or performing back in my high school's different ensembles. So I brought in a friend of mine with much more in-depth and hands-on experience than I have, Mr. Jade Weston. Now, Jade, I've known you for a few years, and you've always been very into the field of music. So why don't you start by talking about your history and how you got into the different instruments you play?
I started playing guitar when I was in 3rd grade. I was actually taught lessons by my 3rd grade teacher. She's super sweet. And then after that, I was sort of okay with playing guitar. It was fine. But then later on into middle school, I started with percussion in the middle school band. And then from there, I was really interested in playing the bass guitar because funny enough, I was with my band friends and we watched the movie Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. And the bass battle scene in that, I was like, oh, bass guitar can be so cool. I'd never noticed it before. And then I started playing it. It's a goofy story, but but yeah, I started after I watched Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. I fell in love with bass, and I even looked for a teacher in my hometown. His name is Kyle Ogle. He's a good friend of mine, and fantastic bass player, fantastic musician in general. And I started doing lessons with him before I got into high school, sort of playing blues and stuff like that, and playing around with the local blues guys in my hometown of Baxter Springs, Kansas. And that's sort of what we have in that area, and sort of in this area too, is it's either country bands or boomer guys playing classic rock, or you're going and you're playing blues at the bars with a bunch of folks and jamming. And I went the blues route, and I built a lot of my skills there. And then I went to high school and started playing in the jazz band and stuff like that. And that sort of also developed my skill as a bass player. And eventually going into high school drumline, I met the members of 501B, my first band, and we started playing in that band, and that lasted for a really long time, and I had a really good time with that. So that's sort of my origin up till now with music and stuff like that.
What is it you find different about all the different instruments that you've played? What do they each bring?
The different instruments I've played, I mostly play, when I'm playing out, I play bass, and that sort of, the job of that instrument is to sort of glue things together, and I try to lean into that position as being a supportive role in a music context, and I really like it, and I love doing it. Sort of in a similar vein as when I'm playing when I was playing in the Pride of the Plains marching band drumline as a tenor player, that has... In the role of the drumline, that has a melodic it has a melodic job, because it's one of the only instruments other than bass drums with like different pitches and stuff like that. So that's where I sort of found that the job of that instrument. And I also played double bass in the Pitt State Orchestra when I was in it, and that has multiple jobs. It most often is just sort of holding the ground and sort of tonality and fundamentals for the rest of the strings. But it also sometimes has its own melodies, and it gets a little more complex when you're playing the double bass with the orchestra. But yeah, those are some of the differences between the instruments that I've played live. As of course, I dabble with a bunch of other instruments. I still play guitar every once in a while, but I haven't really performed guitar on stage in a very long time. And I sing a little bit as backup in my bands and things like that, and play piano at home. But in regards to instruments that I play in person, that's sort of how those all go when I'm playing those individual instruments.
You've mentioned your band, or your multiple different bands. Are you in a band right now?
I am. I'm in a band called the Darters. We're in a bit of a live performance hiatus right now because my lead singer is teaching English in Spain, and that's sort of his job. He's an English teacher in Spain when he's not stateside. And yeah, we were mostly doing... we recorded an entire project. Not all of it's been released yet. We've released 3 singles so far. We recorded an entire album, though. We're waiting on it getting mixed and mastered and all that fun stuff. And we sort of recorded it ourselves too, all independently. It was really fun.
The Darters, I know, is only a few years old, but you mentioned your band before that too, right?
Yeah, 501B was my high school band, and we played from when I was a freshman to probably my second year of college is when we eventually indefinite hiatus is what I would call it, because multiple members of the band. My drummer moved to Tucson, Arizona. my lead singer and guitarist, she moved to Wichita. And it's like, well, can't really do much of that anymore live, but we did record an entire album. We released it. It's called 501B The Movie, and I'm really proud of that project, and I'm really proud of that work. And it sort of gave me that album we did record at a studio, and that was really interesting experience. I really enjoyed the studio experience and sort of getting to interact with that.
So you're pretty experienced and knowledgeable about not only playing an instrument, but performing and working in a band, and also the whole songwriting and recording process, which is great because we're going to dive a little deeper into that next. But first, we're going to take a little break here, so we'll see you right after that. Welcome back, everyone. Before we left off, I introduced our guest today, Jade Weston, and he talked about his experience so far in the music field. So now that you know a bit about him and his bands, we're going to talk a bit more about what it's like to be in one. So Jade, you mentioned your bands and how you've recorded and performed your own original pieces. Did you see yourself as a big part of the songwriting process, or do you just sort of stick to your own bass part?
For when we recorded our album with the Darters, everyone, it was kind of all hands on deck as well as sticking to your part in some ways. If it's sort of a volunteer process when we did it with the Darters. Like, I of course wrote all of the parts for the bass, and how it essentially worked is Brooks Naria, our lead singer, he would write these he would write these skeletons of a song essentially, and then he invites us to sort of come in and fill out our parts. But if you want to, spend more time in the studio than you need to, just recording your instrument, which is already a lot of time, you can, volunteer to like, oh, I also would love to put in this part, or this instrument I feel like would sound good texturally here. And I even did that. On our song Juicy's Rendezvous, there's this goofy little table organ that Brooks just had lying around the studio, and I was like, can I play like chords on this for the last chorus of our song? And he was like, please do. I would love for you to sort of add to more of the song. So in that sort of time when I was recording with the Darters and we were recording our album, it was sort of a pick and choose. Like, you can engage with it as much as you want to. And I mostly just did bass stuff, but there were a couple parts of like, oh, I'll do some backup vocals, I'll do some weird little instrument parts and stuff like that. So yeah, it was really cool. It's really cool to be able to just like get in, do your own part, and have control over that, but also like the freedom to input what you want to in other places as well.
Do you help with lyrics at all, or is it not really your shtick?
Not for this album. Brooks does want us in the future, for any future projects we do, to like, he wants us to come in and be like, add to the writing process, and he really respects our inputs on that. And he just happened to, when we all got together for the first time, this band sort of evolved out of a previous band called Litchfield Mining Company, and he had taken some of those songs that he had intended to write for Litchfield Mining Company, and then realized that I want to do a different project with this. And then we made the Darters, which is more electric, while Litchfield Mining Company was more of a folk band. And just because of that, he had previous works that he had already done, so most of the songs for this album were already written, as well as its exclusive hot drop for this podcast. It's a bit of a concept album. It's got a bit of a story to it, and not a lot of people may know that. So because of that, he really wanted to get the narrative of the concept album through, which sort of restricts everyone else from being able to put into writing. But for future projects, it's going to be a lot more collaborative on the writing and lyric end, and sort of the narrative side of that.
How was the recording process for you? Did you find a studio and get things more professionally recorded and mixed, or did you find it out with what equipment you have on hand?
For my first band, 501B, we went out to a place just outside of Wichita called Peck, Kansas. And it's essentially just a bunch of farms and then a couple of homes and a burger place that's really good. And we went to a place called Red Cat Recording, and it was a great experience. We spent like 2 days recording like 10 songs, and it was it was pretty efficient system. But yeah, we did that. That experience was super great. The people at Red Cat are super supportive, and they were all about making us comfortable while we were recording because we had long days and stuff like that. They're very creatively supportive as well as production. They gave us tips on playing things and sort of things that sort of they may seem like sort of, if you're too prideful, affront to you, like, oh, I don't want my guitar to sound like that. It doesn't sound good at all. And you listen back and you're like, oh, it sounds great in the mix and things like that. Things that they know you need, but you don't know you want. That's sort of the experience with a professional recording. But with the Darters, we recorded everything by ourselves on Brooks's laptop with Apple Logic DAW on it. They were Brooks and some other folks that were in the Darters. They worked at Presbyterian in Pittsburgh, and they had a little room, a little soundproof room up at the top. And over the summer, they had keys to the spot, and we would just go up there and sit in the studio for a day and record parts. And that was a really good experience of like self-organization and taking the time to sort of learn how to do this on your own. Was very, very interesting to me. It was challenging too, because you got to go in there and you're sitting there with your friend and basically hanging out, but also it's like a weird professional thing as well, where you're like, your friend is your friend, but they're also trying to get good parts out of you. It's an interesting sort of tightrope to walk, where you're like, you're friends, but you're also like trying to get a good product that and a good piece of art out the door. But it's also like a space of, because we're not paying anyone to be in the studio, it's a good space for creativity, because when you're not exactly laying down something, or there's not an exact, like...
You're not on a time crunch.
No, not at all. We had all the time in the world. And because of that, we really had the freedom to do what we wanted for those. And there's a lot of extra sort of texture in the album, and just screwing around with different instruments or even non-instrument things to make musical textures, or production techniques that we used. And we just, sitting in the studio and sharing that with each other. And, Brooks did most of the mixing and mastering and effects and stuff like that. But, if we had an idea, we'd always try it just to see if it would work. Throwing the spaghetti at the wall, seeing what sticks. And it was really, it's a very different experience from the professional, but ultimately it was way more free in many ways, and less sort of confined. It was a very abstract and creative space to be in. It was awesome.
Would you say that's better, or do you think you kind of need the structure?
Yeah, I think ultimately it's less about what's better and what's better ultimately, like, for everything, and it's more about your project and what it needs. If you have a project where you're trying to be hyper accurate and you're trying to be very technical and you're trying to get a sound that is directly in your head and you need to get out, having the structure of a studio is great, and a professional to help you get that sound is what you need. But if it's a more abstract project where you don't even know exactly what sound you want, but you want to sort of discover it, and you want to learn about your art as you're making it, doing it on your own is a great way to do it. And having the space to sort of not worry about deadlines or studio time pay or things like that, that really helps with like the creative aspect of it. yeah, I'd say it's less about which one's better, but more about what the project needs.
Something I like about the Darters is that you aren't really defined by a genre yet. Granted, I've only heard the 3 songs that are released right now, but you have all sorts of musical elements in these songs. That it's not a rock thing or pop or indie, but it also has elements of like alternative music or country even on songs like Spooklight. Is that something that you like, or is it something that you help to add to?
All of us come from very different backgrounds. Brooks has a deep history with Americana. Our guitarist Mason, he's always been a rock and roll guy. I personally had played in a lot of rock bands, played with a lot of, I also had a history of blues. Trent, who is also in 501B, he is a giant blues player, amazing blues player, as well as he loves country as well. And Edith has been playing in bluegrass bands for years, and she's some sort of wizardess on the violin, bluegrass, sort of fiddle playing. And Tyler, has a history of classical, jazz, and marching band, trumpet. And all of these different influences came together to make something unique and sort of something that all of us sort of come in with sort of our influences on our sleeves, and we're not afraid to sort of show it. And I think that's what gave us that unique final sound, is being able to just come in with your influences and be like, this is what I love, and I'm going to put it onto this other thing that I love, because ultimately, I can't remember which musician said it, but it was like, good musicians borrow, but great musicians steal, is sort of the saying. I can't remember exactly who said it, but yeah, that's sort of what we all came in with very different influences and very different backgrounds, and I think it gave a unique sort of final project.
Do you have any advice for people in bands like yours or trying to start a band?
I'd say mostly people, they hesitate a lot. They think that they don't, like, oh, I haven't written that many things, or it's like I can't get in there and do my own sort of work, or they feel as though they don't have anything to say, but ultimately they do. They're just hesitating. I think that a lot of people, they sort of think that they have to have a lot of ideas themselves, when the point of, if you want to join a band, is to have a bunch of musicians to bounce ideas off of and create with. It's sort of a collaborative process, right? So a lot of people hesitate. They're like, I don't have enough. I don't personally have a lot of creative ideas. It's like, well, it's not always necessarily just you making something. I think music is ultimately a collaborative thing. It's a way that we have, humans have evolved to sort of make a community. And I think more than anything, just wanting to be a part of a collaboration is a good enough reason to be a part of a band. And the fact that you are creative, most people are creative and they just don't recognize it. Getting to be a part of a band and collaborating with others, ultimately, to me, and just starting with others, is what you should do. Just don't hesitate. Reach out to people. Practice your skills, certainly, so that practice your skills in the end goal of being a good team member for your group, because that's sort of like what I would say is the ultimate goal of music, is to collaborate and create things that live beyond us in some ways. So yeah, just go out and do it. You don't have to be perfect yourself. Other people will pick up the slack for you, and you'll pick up the slack for other people, sort of thing.
That's great stuff, Jade. That's very helpful and inspiring, I think, from the position of someone that's interested in that sort of thing. We're going to take another break here, but we'll be back right after this with some talk about the music industry as a whole. Welcome back, everyone, to the music episode of Making Media. I'm here interviewing Jade Weston, and now we're going to start to look into the music industry itself and how it's changed recently. So, Jade, how do you, as someone who has experience with music, think that the internet has helped to shape the way we make it?
Actually, YouTube is basically the reason I'm a musician in some ways, funnily enough. I remember when I first started playing bass, I would just go on YouTube and look up songs that I like and try to play along with them, or people putting up tablature or sort of tutorials on YouTube. I remember specifically the bassist Flea from the band Red Hot Chili Peppers. There was a video of him. He was doing a promotional thing for this like signature bass that he was releasing that was designed for use with children. It's like a small scale. He's like super affordable, and he just wanted people to learn bass. And he released a video teaching people how to play slap bass, and then I played that over and over and over again. And it's like, never in a time before have you been able to just go find what you want to learn instantly with music, and it's great. It's great in many ways, in regards to learning music and playing music.
It's shocking to me how they used to do it because, like, I think it's hard and I have this infinite expanse of knowledge at my fingertips with the internet. But back then, even like 20 years ago, they'd have to read how to play an instrument or have hours and hours and hours of lessons and practicing or learn an entire song by ear. I couldn't imagine trying to do that.
Yeah, they're just listening to a cassette tape over and over again. That's how my uncle, he's an amazing guitarist. His name's Jade Weston. He's amazing. He's also another influence of mine. But he used to, when my parents were together early, my uncle lived with them, and he would just my parents tell me a story of he'd play along to a track. You go play a little bit to it, rewind it, play it again, rewind it. If you didn't get it right, play it again. And in the house, it would be like over and over and over again. But like that's how it's changed over time. It's like you can still do those things, but now you can just go look up blank name tabs, and I learned exactly how to play it. And sometimes even from the artists themselves, they'll make little tutorials of like, hey, here's how I played this. But yeah, it's really cool for like in regards to internet and learning.
So for the Darters, I know you do a lot of social media marketing to advertise yourself and get your stuff out there. Do you think that's more beneficial than going with like a music label, or are there downsides to it?
You know, distribution and sort of promotion, things like that, have always been sketchy for musicians at all times. And it's sort of changed things where everything in the internet age is content, and everything, no matter what it is, it's content, and you sort of have to be, as of now, bands that want to get a start that don't already have a following from a pre-social media age, you have to sort of become a brand. I know that's how it is with the Darters. We have social media everywhere. We're constantly posting. And the point of it really is that like no one has your album on in a CD, jewel case sitting on their shelf to remind you that you exist anymore. The only way to remind people that you exist is to constantly post, and you have to sort of become your own brand, where bands and musicians have to have a constant they have to have a constant presence online to be recognized. And that's sort of changed the music industry as we know it. You can't just survive just putting your album out and then waiting for people to come find it. You have to go out and be a part of the social media world. And it's different. It's positive. It's negative. A lot of people are getting recognized from areas that may not be normally seen in previous years, but also it's like you have to do a lot more to be recognized as a musician. It's a lot. The pond's a lot bigger, and the fish are the same size.
That's something I've thought about, is that for your size and reach of a band, is it better overall to have that opportunity and that technology out for everybody, or would it oversaturate the market with more competition for you guys?
Not only is it sort of beneficial, but oftentimes it is necessary to be successful in the music industry. I know that Fox Royale, the guys that one of the biggest bands in this area, specifically in the Joplin scene is Fox Royale. And everything they have is due to being well connected in the world of Spotify playlists and promotion and stuff like that. And they're constantly promoting their social media and things like that. And we learned a lot from them about what it takes to be a presence in today's world and be professional musicians. You know, they do a lot of social media work, and they have to, and they're sending, you know, sometimes hundreds of emails a week just trying to get on different Spotify playlists. And that's a big part of promotion nowadays, is just finding playlists that are a big part and have a lot of streams, and then trying to get on them and things like that. It's a huge part of being a musician today, and it's necessary as opposed to just beneficial.
What do you think are the biggest things you need to be successful in the music field today?
In today's world, it's definitely social media presence. It is you sort of with Spotify changing how music sort of works. Everything is sort of playlist based now, where as opposed to releasing an album and people go searching for that album and listen through it all the way or something like that, it's less common for that and more common that people find playlists for either your Spotify Discovery playlist or popular playlists that are related to genres, and then you try to get yourself on those. That's sort of being engaged and trying to get in on those playlists is very important, as well as paying attention to sort of your niche. Everything is sort of a niche audience now, and in every content, and sort of the For You page mindset of sort of content now is things being specifically tailored to one person, and then you stick to that sort of market per se. That's how all content is, and music is no different, where you're trying to find your niche. That's typically the things that I would say are good sort of mindsets to have if you want to be sort of professional musician in this sort of modern world.
Before we go, Jade, what are you working on now? Do you have anything to plug or shout out?
Yeah, basically the Darters we're working on. We've put out 3 singles, and that's sort of the format too today, is that there's not really the album anymore, so it's just putting out singles, sort of like in a way to keep up engagement. So yeah, we've released 3 singles so far. We're working on some others, and then we're eventually going to be releasing our entire album, and it's going to be really, really cool. I'm excited for that project to come out, and people can see the work that we've done. I'm really excited about it.
All right, well, that just about wraps up our show today. Jade, thank you for joining us and sharing the knowledge you have about this sort of thing. You listeners can check out some of Jade's work with his bands 501B or The Darters on Spotify or Apple Music. You can also check out The Darters' website at thedartersmusic.com, which will have some of their music, merch, social media, and more. As usual, thank you for listening to today's episode, and if you liked it, check out our other episodes for more like this, or reach out on Twitter at Making Media Show. Once again, this is Making Media. Thanks for listening.